Yo, welcome to another episode of the Simply Ball Dropping Podcast. I'm your host and the man behind the mic, K Sap. And today, man, we got an interesting show lined up for you guys. But when you come across the video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share the video out. Make sure you got your post notifications on so you'll know every time Simply Ball Dropping drops another hot banger. And if this is your first time coming across the platform, please hit the subscribe button and share the video out. And please comment and like. On this channel, we do sports, hot topics, roundtable talk, and the marriage chronicles. I see everybody in the comment section, #salute. And you know what my mantra is. Tell a friend to tell a friend. It might not be for you, but it might be for them. Okay, guys, today's show, man, we produced a show the other day about, the I Am Athlete podcast, the breakup and the downfall, and what Brandon Marshall had to say about certain components, Fred Taylor, Channing Crowder, and actually, Ocho Cinco was a part of that I Am Athlete podcast as well. And, Ryan Clark, he was the last component, so he wasn't involved with that podcast. But, Brandon Marshall is on like Fred Taylor said, a clout chasing tour talking about them guys. And Fred Taylor actually clapped back on Brandon Marshall, stating the obvious that, Brandon Marshall was, bad business deals. And I think that's why the I Am Athlete podcast did not, sustain, and it didn't continue. And the fallout was, because of Brandon Marshall wanted to sell it, wasn't giving those guys that was participants their cut. It was about money, and things just didn't work out. So now Channing Crowder, Ryan Clark, and Fred Taylor formed the Pivot podcast, which is doing very successful, which is the numbers are through the roof. They have so many guests on their show, and, everybody is, digging the Pivot podcast. And Fred Taylor likes to say that Brandon Marshall is being very bitter. And also, if you go back and look at the podcast that I did, there was a clip saying that from Fred Taylor saying that Brandon Marshall was the biggest coward. And then, Brandon Marshall has been going on his clout chasing tour. Like Fred Taylor said, he was on Cam Newton's podcast, airing out the dirty laundry. He was getting heated. And then he took shots at Ryan Clark. I don't know why he took shots at Ryan Clark. And things escalated. So Ryan Clark responded back, talking about, he wanted to know the situation between him and Brandon Marshall. So he saw Brandon Marshall. He said he wasn't walking by nobody. He said that's one of the lies that Brandon Marshall had told on him. And he said he walked up to him like a man, shook his hand just to see the temperature in the room, to see where they stood at. And he looked him eye to eye. So he wanted to understand, what's the issue? What's the beef? What's the problem? But now it comes out that Marcellus Wiley has now got involved on his podcast yesterday. He stated that, Ryan Clark is a lie. Ryan Clark did not do that to him. He didn't reciprocate that to him when he saw him in the Super Bowl. Like, there's a known issue between Ryan Clark and Marcellus Wiley. And the thing about it is Marcellus Wiley told the story. If you go to his podcast, and if you follow Marcellus Wiley's podcast, he stated that when they was at the Super Bowl, he walked up to Ryan Clark, and like Ryan Clark, like almost like he saw a ghost and walked right by him. And, some guy was asking to take a picture and things like that. And basically, Marcellus Wiley told the story that, Ryan Clark did not address him head on, like he stated that he addressed Brandon Marshall when Ryan Clark stated the obvious, said, I'm not walking by no fucking body. But at the same time, you did that to Marcellus Wiley. And Marcellus Wiley's on the podcast called him out. So things are escalating in this mainstream media with these so-called former athletes, these guys that try to do business ventures together. And when things don't go, right, it's always somebody else's fault. They point the finger and they blame. But it's getting interesting because, like I said, Fred Teller, he called it out. Because if you notice, I don't know what Brandon Marshall is doing these days, but Brandon Marshall has been, seen on various podcasts, talking about Fred Taylor, Channing Crowder, and also Ryan Clark. Also, Terrell Owens weighed in on the situation as well. Terrell Owens went to his Twitter and said, we got to stop giving Brandon Marshall a pass because of his mental illness. It's been in the past that Brandon Marshall, has a mental illness, you know what I'm saying? And, T.O. was like, man, we got to stop giving him a pass for his meltdowns and stuff like that. But a lot of people say that Brandon Marshall has bad business ventures. And Fred Teller basically stated that, where are the guys that you depended on back then? There's nobody around now. So basically there's some truth to what Fred Teller is saying about Brandon Marshall. The thing about it is Brandon Marshall, like I said, he had a brief stint with First Things First with Nick Wright, Kevin Wiles, and Chris Bouchard, during the COVID time when they wasn't in the studio and they was doing all their, sessions via Zoom. He was only on there for a short period. So I don't know what happened with that situation, but it seems like Brandon Marshall can't hold these business deals down. And I think that was the downfall of the I Am Athlete podcast, because it started off well, but then Brandon Marshall, like Fred Teller said, Brandon Marshall, apparently wanted to sell, something that all of them built together, but nobody got no residuals out of that, and that business deal crumbled. So, like I stated, that's when Channing Crowder, Ryan Clark, and Fred Taylor formed the Pivot Podcast. And when the Pivot Podcast broke on the scene, things started going well for them guys. Now it seems like Brandon Marshall is real bitter, going around trying to, expose them and airing out all the dirty laundry, but these guys are clapping back. But Marcellus Wiley's clapped back on Ryan Clark because there's a known feud between them two, and things are escalated. But all this drama going back and forth with these guys, when is it going to stop? We've seen the likes of Stephen A. Smith, Jason Whitlock, Terrell Owens, Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman. We've seen it all. Acho and Marcellus Wiley's. All these former colleagues that work together, things have escalated. Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless. It's pure entertainment. It's giving people stuff to talk about. YouTube creators are all over it, forming their opinions and stating their opinions, giving it to their audience. But it kind of amazes me that these things are going on. But when you find another group that's put together that's being successful and the odd man out, he always wants to come for you. But we don't know what the truth is, because everybody's exposing everybody. Everybody said something about everybody. But to me, I think it's, comical that, Brandon Marshall is, going on this, like Fred Taylor said, this tour going from podcast to podcast, on, like he said, his clout chasing tour. So you guys let me know what you think in the comments, man. Keep sharing the podcast out. Keep subscribing to the channel. Keep telling a friend to tell a friend. And that's going to wrap up another episode of the Simply Ball Dropping Podcast. I'm your host and the man behind the mic, K-Sap. and we'll catch you on the next one. Deuces.
Thanks for listening to the Simply Ball Dropping podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share on all major platforms.
Another one.